Well, thanks for being here. This is a total adaptation for the weather, and I hope you survive the storm really well and are nice and cozy. And um, we flipped over from this in-person workshop and kind of created this PowerPoint so that we would have something to record. It was really a really casual conversation to begin with. And we were going to do this at the Biomes Heights Commons and have a printout of these slides. So I'm just going to go through the slides so that you get an idea of how native plants fit into the greater watershed and our work at Biomes. And then I'm going to hand it over to Catherine Dahl-Kahn, Minnesota Water Steward, and we're going to do a little demo for winter seed sowing. I'll talk about native plants and the watershed. We have a visual on the spectrum of ground covers, and then we'll get into our seed selection, seed sowing, and a few follow-up resources. I also have this PowerPoint. Thanks again. Just click right on them and go to these follow-up resources. So we are connecting the dots from the upland to the lowland, and the lowland includes our basins such as wetlands and lakes where water ends up. What happens upland influences the lowland areas, and that involves soil, nutrients, anything that's on the street for automotive fluids, things like that, and anything we put on our lawns. And we like to say that the curb or even the lawn is lakeshore property because there's still runoff that happens on conventional turf. Here's a map of our watershed. It also contains the pink image of our wetlands. So these are our major wetland complexes. We have over 500 of them in the watershed. And these are really sort of like the kidneys of the watershed. They are part of the greater system between upland and our lakes. And wetlands are an important part of our groundwater and surface water. We are connecting the biome itself. And by this, I mean underground biomes have a whole lot going on between the nematodes and all the critters that will be using plant roots. Air and water are supposed to circulate through soil, and soil can be storing lots of water if it is in a healthy biome. The root passages of native plants will create that habitat underground, as well as create cavities and kind of create a dynamic system, like a soil building, biome building factory underground. Kentucky bluegrass doesn't really have a lot of action when it comes to building that biome. And we're encouraging native plants because it will help upland, transition zones, and lowland areas be more balanced. And that tends to look more like this, a lot higher standing surface cover than what we usually see in parks. But I'm going to go through the spectrum and kind of convey it to compare it to a house. Something like this walkway is actually really functional and compares to a habitat because a habitat will have all sorts of things with purpose. It has a placement, it has practical uses. A certain person might grab a certain item and that's just their routine, and you've got your areas for storage and your cupboards. And for a habitat may look messy, but as far as the function goes, it's a lot more related to this with how water cycle and how wildlife are interacting with that habitat. So we're going to try to create this out in the yard. And there's different ways to do that. You really have to take into account your needs and your preferences, and it's okay to work with what you can do. If you're not able to go full on prairie, there's other things you can do. At the low end of the spectrum, we have the conventional turf. This is a low surface cover and low complexity. It's all maybe just a few species or maybe one species of grass. And most often that's Kentucky bluegrass. If we get a little higher on the spectrum, we start to get deeper roots and a little more complexity. And this is where you can see the bee lawn with different types of low, low growing vegetation. Into the middle areas, you start to convert chunks of lawn into higher standing vegetation. That could be complex or uniform, like the picture on the bottom. And then you could start to play with 50-50, where you have some conventional turf and some higher vegetation. Into the middle to upper area, then you're starting to convert an entire yard into something like this fescue, no-mow grass. You're converting the whole yard into a prairie, or something like a shoreline to act as a buffer around a storm pond or a wetland. At the higher end of the spectrum, you're flipping your routine and your management from mowing to all-out prairie management. The other spectrum that we have to think about is upland areas and lowland emergent areas. And that transition zone in the middle gets missed very often. It's still a valuable part between in a balanced watershed. So what we're trying to do is pick the right plants for the appropriate place. And if there's a spot that's difficult or it's hassle to maintain, chances are it's actually in need of plants that are more appropriate for that area. And I'll get into some examples of how we can see this play out. These are results from our cost share program and right here in our watershed. Here's a low-mow turf made of primarily grama grass, but these turfs can be buffalo grass and a mix of different fescues. Some of them are a little more sensitive to something like foot traffic. So it's not always the play area, but if you have an area that's not supposed to be play area and only a mower travels over it, this is a great way to get more of a root mass and healthy soil biome right into your yard without doing much specializing in native plants. After low mow, you can get a little more biomass, you get more vegetation on the surface with sedges. And I love this because it looks like more of a Dr. Seuss yard. It's got texture, it's got character, and we'll do a lot of changing and adaptation throughout the year. Beyond sedges, we have native plants that can act like a ground cover. And by that, I mean, it can still be a uniform single or two species planting list, and they fill out and become really bunchy. So prairie dropseed is a great one for that. Flowering plants like Joe Pieweed are really good at taking up space and filling up big areas with low diversity. That makes it easy to maintain because you don't have to do as much, is this my plant that I want here, or is this something I don't want? And what's a weed and what's not? And once you get to know Joe Pieweed and you know that area, it makes it practical and simple if you just designate that as Joe Pieweed zone. Here's another prairie example. So this septic mound was converted to a prairie so that the mower didn't have to travel up and down the hill and that kind of thing. But as you see, it's also more advanced in terms of the complexity. There's a lot more plants going on. Going this route means that you're interested in knowing what's prairie plant and what's an undesirable plant that's kind of acting like a weed. Other ground covers include dwarf bush honeysuckle. This is a native variety of honeysuckle. Coral bells. And bunch grasses include switchgrass, little blue stem, June grass, or prairie dropseed. Very attractive with their seed heads in the fall. And don't forget about ferns. They can create nice, consistent mats. Sensitive fern, maidenhair. You've probably heard about ostrich fern, which is probably one of the most aggressive. But there's a wide variety of ferns that can act like a ground cover. Rolo sumac is more of a shrub. And here's some ways that we've seen folks combine different types of projects, where we've got the complex zone of a rain garden with different native plants. That's kind of like the area to be a gardener, manually pick out the weeds and keep track of the native plants. Here in the foreground on the left, you see that's really where the day-to-day focus is happening, right here. And then we have our low-mow turf that's in this strip. It's a walkway that kind of connects the patio to the rest of the backyard. And then it transitions to the prairie. This is a new prairie in this photo. It's still pretty low standing. And once it matured a couple years later, it looked a bit like this. So here's the homeowners kindly showing off their project, that rain garden on the right and prairie on the left. The prairie from another angle, it really did well. This is one of the ones that's just a joy to see. It's so fun to see how it explodes with color and really thriving. Here's a hypothetical combination. When you start to think about your yard and what's possible, we have to really go with what is the need according to the sun, shade, the soil moisture, and what you're using the yard for. So for example, say you have a backyard wet spot in the back corner where maybe multiple properties kind of drain there and it gets soggy and it's kind of a hassle as turf. This purple area would be something really big and bulky like tamarack trees or river birch, something like sandbar willow to take up space and maybe even act as a privacy screen. Then we can do the consistent low diversity ground covers. So these green ones could be something like a sedge ground cover. And this light green one could be another privacy screen that's a little more shrub-like, say a dwarf honeysuckle. And then 1 to 3 or whatever is of interest in the high complexity little prairie patches, often called a pocket prairie. And this would be the wildflowers mixed with grasses, a little more diverse. And then we have the rain garden option, the bowl-like feature to intentionally capture stormwater. And you could do this kind of blend or just 2 of them, or just start small and do 1 of them. And that's really okay. Here's an example in Vadnais Heights. This property has a rain garden with 2 basins, the basin in the back and this basin here. This one actually connects to their basement sump pump, which outlets drains right into the rain garden, as well as their downspout. And in the backyard, they have a low mow turf. Here it is in about June. It mostly looks like any conventional turf. It's just a little longer and a little scruffier. This can be a different style, whether somebody does the no mow variety or does occasional mowings to kind of keep it a little shorter throughout the year. But again, nice texture and a lot more ground cover and root cover. Here is Catherine's yard. Catherine has multiple rain garden basins, and Lambert Creek, County Ditch 14, is right back here. So what she's capturing is the really direct benefit to store and ease the burden of downstream storage, which is really adding a nice value to the overall creek system. In the front, Catherine put this prairie in starting in 2021. In 2022, it was getting established with brand new baby plants. And then a little rain garden connected to the downspout. Okay, with that, I'm gonna let Catherine talk for a while and we'll hand it over.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys confirm that you can hear me?
I can.
Okay, I want to talk to you guys about winter sowing. And so this right here is just a picture last winter. This is actually maybe only like a third or a fourth of what I ultimately ended up winter sowing. I went super crazy last year and I will never do that again, just because you realize that once you like germinate all these plants, you need to put them somewhere or you just like wasted a lot of time and energy. And that's what I did. But what I'm showing you here is winter sowing is a seed starting method. It uses our natural Minnesota outdoor conditions to germinate seeds in a way that mimics nature, but actually gives it a bit of a competitive edge if you're doing it in plastic containers. Because those plastic containers act as like a mini greenhouse. And so in a way, they kind of help to get the plant to the right conditions that it needs, but it also can germinate a little bit quicker than a seed that was just thrown on the ground and is going through like the truly natural process. In fact, like I'm showing you here, I have jugs on the right, milk jugs, they're actually distilled water jugs. And then on the left, like same seed source, same time that I put them out, those are just open containers with potting soil with the seeds on top. And then I put like a wire frame over the top of it just to keep rodents and stuff out of digging in there. And those all germinated too. I'd say at like the same germination rates as what was in jugs, but they did germinate later. I'd say like a week or two later. I'd say by the end of the summer, you couldn't really tell the difference in the size of the plants that were one method or the other. But if you want more of an instant gratification, quicker gratification that you're going to get something, the milk jugs is very cheap and dirty, pun intended, way to do it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how native plants require, some native plants, not all, but I'd say most of them are going to probably require some type of cold moist stratification. And that's what this winter sowing is helping to mimic. And I'll explain a little bit more about that once we get, I think, to the next slide. And I can talk about some specific examples of what I mean by that. Oh, well, it's going to be 2 slides from now. Promise me. I'll promise you I'm getting there. So this is zooming in on this on the pots that I just put potting soil in, and I put seed on top. And then as you can see, I think it's chicken wire, just was like staple gunned over a wood frame. And I just did this to keep squirrels out of the seeds. If you're putting seeds inside milk jugs, there's not a squirrel that's going to crawl through that hole and, ever think to do that again. So you're gonna be fine. You don't have to like protect your milk jugs like you would if you're just putting an open pot out there. Um, these plants have germination codes. They'll show that on the next slide, but let's not move there quite yet. These germination codes tend to be pretty universal if you look from like one grower to another. I tend to hone in on using information coming from Prairie Moon Nursery, which is a nursery based out of Winona, Minnesota. They have a very good informative website that can tell you all about what a species needs for its germination, and they give like a code to it. They sign a letter, and then that letter corresponds to some instructions on how you can get that plant to germinate. I think they've figured it out pretty well for the generally easy stuff. And I think that just in general, as I was mentioning, shade plants are just difficult. And I'm assuming that that nursery probably has like some other secret methods they're doing to get their stuff to germinate. And I don't expect for them to share that to me because that's like their business. When you're picking out your seeds, you're going to want to pay attention to the germination code. You're going to want to pay attention to the soil moisture that that plant is going to want. Always keep in mind that you need to pick the right plant for the right place. I can tell you from my own experience, you can hope and wish that a plant's going to do fine in a place that it's not meant to be. But if you want it to live, you're going to have to baby it. And I don't know, that just sounds like more effort than I want to put in. I do want this to be as low maintenance as possible. So if you're picking a plant that wants its feet wet and likes to have more moisture and you're putting it in an upland, drier area, you're gonna have to water that thing just to even keep it alive and get it to like flourish and seed. And I can tell you from experience, because Joe Pieweed likes moisture, and I put it in an upland area, and it lived for 1 year because we had a really rainy year. And I can tell you in future years, it was not happy because it was not in the right place for the type of plant it was. Also, you will see when we eventually get to the next slide that native plants have different bloom times throughout the seasons. So right here, as you can see, these are the seeds I have available. I do technically have some other seeds available, but these ones I tried to not overwhelm you guys with 40 options. I picked out ones that people tend to like. They tend to like the color. They find them easy to grow, easy to identify and be proud about. And so here got their common name. It's always good to know the species name of what you're planting because people can refer to things by different common names. There's the germination code. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. Color, I tried to put the color that when it flowers, what it will look like. A couple of these are grasses, so I put grass there. They won't flower quite like you would expect them to. Some of these can grow really tall. Right now you can see meadow blazing star can grow up to 5 feet. So can showy goldenrod. I can tell you with with relative, no, 100% confidence, your showy goldenrod is going to get to that height pretty much if you put it in the right place. And some of these are going to be shorter. So you're going to want to keep that in mind when you're trying to pick out the right plant for the right place, because not only does the moisture of the soil matter and the light it's going to get, you also want it to look appealing if you're trying to do a very planned planting. You're not going to put your 5 feet tall stuff in the front, just like you're not going to want to put your 2 feet stuff in the far back. So it's good to kind of think about that. Some of these plants are very good at spreading over time. If you want to know which ones those are because you want that or you don't want that, let me know. I would call some of these aggressive, some are not aggressive at all. And then bloom time. They have different bloom times here, pulling some information from Prairie Moon Nursery. Some of them are very early, some of them are very late, some of them are right in the middle of the summer. And so it's great when you're thinking about what you want to plant to try to provide color throughout the summer. That's just for your own visual interest, but also for our pollinators. They need to have a pollen source throughout the entire summer. So don't just focus on stuff that is in early spring and ignore the fact that, we still need something to feed them before they start their overwintering. So you can kind of look at that and pick out things that make sense, like asters are late bloomers. It's really great to probably consider an aster. Goldenrods are also late bloomers, so I would recommend that you have at least one aster or a goldenrod. And then you want to, pick something that's more early, like golden Alexanders are quite early. Lance leaf tickseed, I love that plant. It blooms like all summer. And it's very easy to take care of, and you can split it like a hosta and put it in all these other different places. I could go on forever about all these plants because they all have great attributes to them. I'm just looking at this and there's nothing about any of these that I can tell you I don't like about them, but you need to make sure it's the right plant in the right place. So pay attention to the soil, pay attention to the light. These are all generally going to want full sun. Some of them are going to be able to take part sun pretty well as well. Yeah, so let's focus back on germination codes. I know I talked a lot, so I expect questions if I talked way too fast, and this will be recorded for you guys as well. So germination codes, at least by how Prairie Moon Nursery assigns germination codes, A's actually don't need any type of cold moist stratification. If you guys decide right now that I've completely overwhelmed you and you don't want to do this right now, and then you change your mind in late April or early May, you can plant aromatic aster, smooth blue aster, little blue stem, side oats grama, purple coneflower, purple prairie clover. You can plant those in the spring and they're going to germinate because they didn't need any type of cold moist stratification. But when you start to look at some of these other codes, this C30 and this C60, and I can tell you there are ones that exist that are C90s and C120s, not that I put on this list, but that's the number of days that they recommend as cold moist stratification days. And so if you look at some of these C60 ones, I'll have to admit, we're pretty much right at the end of the time that you're probably going to have success with those. It doesn't mean that if you tomorrow decided to plant like a C120 that you would get nothing. You could get something still, but the germination rate is definitely going to be impacted if you don't have enough cold moist stratification days. Sorry, I'm realizing I didn't explain that. So cold moist stratification, I'm not going to give like a super scientific explanation for it. How I think of that is when I walk through the demo here of how you set up a milk jug for winter sowing, you are going to put basically not sopping wet potting soil, but potting soil that's definitely moist. You need moist soil because, and in addition to the cold, moist together, that provides the conditions that Nick would probably be able to explain this better, but basically it needs that type of condition to make the seed aware that it's ready and it's met the conditions to germinate. So some plants have an innate ability in their seeds to prevent them from accidentally germinating in the fall. And then, hitting winter and being killed off because they're a small, weak seedling. So cold moist stratification is a requirement for some seeds for them to understand that it's time to germinate once they hit the right conditions of, enough sun and heat. So things like the A's, they just send out a lot of seed, probably. They probably have other mechanisms for why it's okay that they're just A's and don't need cold moist stratification. Whereas the other ones, if you threw lance leaf tick seed out just in May and you didn't do any type of cold moist stratification, I'm not saying you wouldn't get anything to germinate, but I would be shocked if you had much success with that because it's been a seed that's been identified to need that type of pre-treatment in order to be conditioned for germination. I hope that answered, at least at a high level, what that is. I'm sure there's probably actual scientific explanations for that better than what I gave, but I see the thumbs up, so I'm going to take that as sufficient enough.
Well, I'll add that yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Nick.
Well, I'll just add that even in the advanced restorations, when you have the scientific experts, when you've got something like a new planting happening from agriculture or from what was just straight turf grass, it's basically a desert. They're still in a mystery on what's going to take and really what's going to germinate, because some of these plants will want to respond to that biome, and if there's nothing there and we're trying to bring life back to the soil, it's a mystery on how is it going to do. And some of them, and I imagine it might be these A's that you're talking about, are going to be able to start from scratch, and there's not much in the biome, and they're just going to be part of creating the new system. So it's just interesting that, like, yes, there's a lot of advanced soil science that you could go into, but there's also the mystery and the fun of what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I'll say I picked these because I think these ones are pretty good and pretty easy to winter sow and have success. There was definitely plants, seeds that I bought to try to introduce new species to my yard. And I'm sure the seed was good because I bought it from a reputable source and I followed the germination codes and I got nothing. So there's definitely, like, sometimes just like some condition that it needed just isn't accounted for. And the germination code is only talking about the germination code is only talking about cold moist stratification. And in some cases, if you go to Prairie Moon Nursery, some seeds on there are going to need additional steps like scarification. So you might need to like rub it between sandpaper. The letter D here means that for these germination codes, that means that the seed is either really super small, that they're just cautioning you to not bury it in your potting soil because it needs light in order to germinate. And because it's so small, it's so easy for it to like fall in the cracks of your potting soil. So that's like another example of, you know, just conditions that you have to keep in mind when you're setting up your winter sowing. But with that in mind, I did intentionally try to pick stuff that I think you can be successful with. And I'll give you plenty of seeds. So hopefully you guys get some things to germinate, and honestly, come back to me next year if you guys like this and you want to try even more, because I have way more seed for my yard than I could ever possibly use. So with that, I'm going to go into a demonstration of like, what do I mean by winter sowing? Okay. So you guys let me know if like I'm not in camera enough for you to see this, because I'm literally sitting on the family room floor in the basement. Okay, so what I have here is this distilled water jug. You know, just a 1 gallon distilled water jug. I have a couple other jugs here with me, just so I can explain something to keep in mind when you're trying to identify a container. Don't worry so much about the container this year unless you really want to go crazy with winter sowing, but we have enough probably to provide everyone like 3 or 4 jugs that haven't been used, and we'll set up a time for you guys to go pick them up at City Hall. But we'll follow up with details on that. Hi, everyone. Oh, I'm bigger. Okay.
Perfect.
Is this working now? Okay. This is a distilled water jug. We have some to give to you guys. You can pick them up at City Hall, Vadnais Heights City Hall, I should clarify, because we might not all be from Vadnais Heights. And I'll give you guys more instructions on when you would be able to pick that up. But this is, I find this to be the perfect container. I don't know, just something about it being clear and just like squared on the bottom. And I like this handle so much more because I can like carry like 3 or 4 of these at a time. But you can also use a standard milk jug. Not really, you know, too different, and you have this little handle you can carry things around. I wanted to feature this milk jug though in particular. I'm realizing like my lighting makes me, it's pretty dark over here, so I apologize. I wanted to make sure that you guys could tell the difference. You cannot. Trust me when I tell you that this is like a milk jug that has some light that can penetrate through it, and this is like a white milk jug, you know, like an empty but like white milk jug. Some light can get in through this, but I would personally not recommend that you use this like completely white plastic milk jug. You do want the ones that will let more light through. I don't even know if you, oh, you can see my finger there. Maybe that's a way I can demonstrate this to you guys, because your seed needs light. Okay, so that you can use you know, the typical milk jugs that are, you know, pretty transparent. They'll work just as well. I used a lot of those as well, but I love this distilled water. And if you know people that run humidifiers throughout the whole winter, they'll love, the lovely people will be happy to give you their jugs. I have, you guys, I have like 6 bags of these from one source. So that's one way to get them. Okay, so let's actually demonstrate what we do here. I have a milk jug. I'm going to eventually put potting soil into it. And one thing you have to make sure you do before you start to put potting soil and seeds in this is you want to make sure you put some drainage holes at the bottom. And so there's several ways that you can do this, but honestly, I found the easiest way is to use a drill. And so be careful, but you just drill like 3-4 holes in the bottom of these. That's 1, 2, 3. And then what you need to do next is you need to cut this open so you can actually get potting soil in there and get your seeds in there. I found that the way that I like to do this is I like to first like drill a hole that I can stick my scissors into. I'm gonna drill a hole in the side. There's not an exact science as to like how high or low. I mean, obviously you don't want it to be so low that you can't get enough potting soil in there, because you do want your plants to be able to have a place to, grow roots until they're established enough to transplant. But maybe about halfway through, you know, still you'll drill a hole. Okay, done with the drill. It's one of the most exciting parts. Now I got to figure out where I put that scissors. Oh, here it is. I drilled a hole. I'm gonna put my scissors in there. Cut. Cutting around. Do not cut the whole thing off. I'll tell you why. You want a hinge. I just like that because it's just easier to move it around and stuff later if you start to, eventually you're going to duct tape this, but if like your duct tape comes loose or whatever, you kind of always just have like a hinge. You can do it however you want, but that's how I do it. So now I am ready to put potting soil in here. I still haven't quite figured out exactly how we're gonna like get you guys potting soil. Nick and I might actually like prep your containers for you, but I'm a little weary about volunteering for all that work here this weekend. So we'll figure it out and let you guys know how this is gonna work. We're gonna give you the potting soil. We'll figure out. Anyways, where I'm going with this is I'm putting potting soil in here. Depending on how we give you the potting soil, you're going to want to make sure you moisturize it if it's getting too dry when you pick it up, or however state it's in, because it's cold moist stratification. If you put your seeds on basically dried out potting soil, you're not doing the moist part. So I have this whole tub here, potting soil. You don't have to put it in a tub. I just find this to be easier than trying to dig out of a bag constantly. I got a picture right back there. Well, literally the bag, it's just standard potting soil. You don't have to get the moisture control stuff. You don't have to get the expensive stuff. You're welcome to do that if you have a reason that you want to use a different type of potting soil. I've used this just fine. I haven't experimented with other stuff, but this has worked for me for the seeds that I'm providing for you guys. So, potting soil in. Okay. You can press it down a little bit, but not too much because you don't want to like compress it. Oh yeah, Nick is saying regular because when it comes, okay, I can't read the whole comment, but whatever Nick put in there about regular potting soil, I will trust Nick. Okay. Potting soil in here. Now's the fun part. Hopefully at this point you already know what you want to grow. And you have seeds, which I'm giving you. I have a lot of seeds. Let's just play with some Prairie Blazing Star. I think that's on your list. If it isn't, you're welcome to have some if you want it. I have lots of different seeds. This part, honestly, I don't do it any different depending on the species. And maybe that's terrible, but it's worked okay for me. I just, I know Jen is laughing. You guys, this is not really that scientific. Maybe Nick, I don't know if Nick, if you have some other pointers, but I'm literally just like sprinkling seed on the surface.
I love it. It makes me super happy and it's very approachable. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
And you could, I don't think you should just leave it there. Like I then kind of like press it on the soil, make sure it gets some good soil contact. And, because I worry that maybe some of it isn't covered enough, I might go grab a little bit more potting soil and sprinkle it on the top and press it down a little bit more and done. You don't want to put like a ton of seed in there unless you for some reason know that the seed has got really low germination rates, like it's 2-year-old seed, or seed that's been sitting in bad storage conditions or something, because you'll get a lot of plants and then it gets really difficult to split them later because the roots will all entangle with each other and you're basically like killing your plants as you try to separate them. But I mean, you can kind of do whatever you want, but rough guess, I mean, there's easily 20-30 seeds here. I wouldn't go more than that. It's up to you what you want to do. Duct tape. We got to seal this. I should have pulled this green off. I mean, it's probably fine, but I actually would have, no, I can do it right now. I don't know why I'm talking about it when I can just do it. Okay, I'll do it later. Duct tape. You need to seal it. I use duct tape. Some people use packaging tape. I don't know that I trust packaging tape's really going to survive a Minnesota winter. So duct tape. And just wrap it around. And take the cap off. You can keep the caps because I think some people think that you need to maybe have a reason to put them back on again. I've never ever felt a reason to do that. And then guess what? As long as your potting soil is moist, you just walk outside in your snow boots and probably like your waders right now, and you set it outside in a place where it's going to get some sun. And hopefully if we get some rain or snow, you also do want it to be a place where maybe it can get some moisture, or you're going to want to go out there and check periodically that your potting soil isn't getting too dried out, because again, the whole cold moist stratification part. So what are you going to do if you realize your potting soil is drying out? This is probably not very helpful to people to tell you a way that to do this correctly that involves spending some more money, but I would probably recommend like a mister, because you don't want to pour water in there and potentially disrupt the seeds and have them get buried too far. You kind of want to mist. I've actually bought some, those like chemical sprayers. Yeah, you guys know when people want to go and spray the whole yard for weeds. I just put water in those instead. So it's just water. And then like I spray that. So when I had way too many jugs last year, I was carrying around this battery powered sprayer and I just went from jug to jug and just sprayed a little. You might not need to do that if we keep getting the moisture that we've been getting. And then you just wait until spring, and you could probably be really eager and like look in there for stuff to germinate. They're not all going to germinate. If you're working with multiple different species, they're not all going to germinate at the same time. But generally, like if you made multiple jugs of the same species and they're all kind of sitting in the same part of your yard, they should germinate pretty close to each other. Trying to figure out if I left out anything. You can use other containers, like this would work, this apple juice container. And also, obviously smaller containers. Obviously you're reducing your surface area for plants that could grow. And then as obviously I'd showed you guys before, you can also just put soil in here and follow the exact same steps, except for you're not taping something up. And then just be wary that these are going to dry out much quicker than this would. So you might have to baby these more than you would if you did this. And they're also probably going to germinate later because they don't have this greenhouse effect that your jug seeds have. I'll pause for a second. What questions do you guys have from that? Oh, I see Jen has one.
I have lots of questions because I failed so badly last year. How do you know when they're dry? Because I used milk jugs that were kind of opaque, not the white ones, but like still not as clear as yours right there. And I undid the tape a lot to check the moisture. It was like a thing, and then I would like spray them. And it sounds like maybe I was more hands-on than I had to be.
Yeah, it sounds like you may have been. So I guess a way to try to explain, I think the easiest way to start is just make sure your soil has the right moisture when you start. So if it's like waterlogged, that's way too much. But it does need to be wet, like moist. I don't know if Nick, if you have additional pointers on like the right ways to check for soil moisture, but for me, I've put things in that were way too waterlogged and they still turned out okay, but I knew that wasn't what I was supposed to do, but I was afraid of it drying out. So maybe that is the secret to success, is probably a little on the more side than the less side. But I don't, Nick, do you have some advice? Because I know you've winter sown too.
I have also failed, so I hope that's encouraging. And I think I compare it to the greenhouse mechanical mode, where they have an operation on a consistent timeline where they're watering the same amount, but it's frequent. If you're going to be really frequent, don't do a lot. Just really look for a tiny bit of ponding in this. Like I did the spray bottle and I pooled it just a little bit, but when I failed, I did that too much. And because I like my little plants, I wanted to do this twice a day. So I
Oh,
ended up doing a twice a day spray, spray, spray. But if you're going to say do it every other day, you'd want to do a little more generous, look for that little pooling before it's starting to soak into the soil, and spread that out if you're being more generous. So there's kind of this experience based, you got to try it, and
get the
you
feel
can even
for
you
it.
can feel it a little bit and try to put your fingers in the soil, but then
I
you
don't
don't
know
want
that
to
you're gonna
mess.
be able to do it through this
Oh
process.
yeah,
though.
because I did the other way, but
Another hint though, I guess, when you're doing it in a milk jug, or I guess this greenhouse effect, you can know that you have enough moisture if you're seeing condensation along the top. If you're not seeing any condensation and it is kind of like a sunnier or warmer winter day, then you probably need to give it a bit of a spray. Obviously, if it's a super duper cold day, maybe you won't see that, but I did take that as a little bit of a sign. If I wasn't seeing condensation towards the top, you just go give it a little bit of a spray.
Helpful.
and they're hardy.
You keep the tops on? No, off, right?
Keep the tops off.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like some people online like argue about if it should be there or not, but the vast majority are going to tell you it's not supposed to be there.
Okay.
Like you do still want some breathing to happen here. Like otherwise you made a terrarium or something.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
So as far as the watering, I mean, realistically, were you watering these every day? Like this,
No.
this is high maintenance? Okay.
No,
I don't want high maintenance. This has got to be easy.
I think in the winter, like right now that we have, I didn't water at all. It was probably when you get closer to April and we have warmer days that I was worried about things drying out. So it was really more around April, early May, when things are starting to actually, germinate, depending on what it is. I probably could count the number of times I watered it from the time of putting them out in January to when they germinated. Like it was probably less than 10 times, like total.
Okay.
So definitely for these jugs, it was 5 or less times for sure. These I was watering more frequently just because they are open to the elements. Like they're going to dry out much quicker.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a question in the comments here.
Oh yeah, sure. Let me open that up and take a look.
What do we do after germination in the spring?
Oh yeah, I saw that. Okay. So this will probably be something to go online and just, visually see, because I didn't bring something here to show you, but you don't want to move a plant until it has its first set of true leaves. Never before it has its first set of true leaves. So the first leaf set that comes out when a plant germinates there's a special word for it, but it's not their true leaves. They're the next set that comes out it will probably look different, and that's like their actual true leaves. You do probably still don't want to transplant them. I honestly wait until the plants, like several of them have, grown at least, 4 inches or maybe more. I think the way I've also had plants that I literally did not split until the end of summer because I didn't have the time. So you really could split them at any point after they get their true leaves, but realize that they're going to be weak and young when you do it that early. And if you start waiting a little bit too far into the middle of summer, you realize when you transplant those babies, like you might need to baby them if you put them out in the heat of the summer and like full sun, because they could go through a shock. Any transplant's going to have a bit of shock. So I think if you don't get it out by second week of June, I would probably almost wait until like middle of August. But I think it really just depends on your time and where you think you want to put it. Of course, if you leave it in the container over the summer, you also need to water and baby it. So honestly, you're going to germinate some plant babies, and whether you transplant them or you keep them in the jugs, you're going to have to baby them. So really more of the time commitment happens after they germinate than this process right here. But I can tell you, when I showed you guys that picture, I had like 4 or 5 times that amount of stuff that I ultimately winter sowed, and I still managed to take care of over half of it. So it can be done. I went to the extreme. I think if you guys keep it to like 4 or 5 jugs or whatever, you guys, that's like 2 minutes of watering if you need to do it. I don't think it's that much. Maybe I'm minimizing the process that goes into that, but we'll be fine. So yeah, you can split them. Honestly, what you would do is you take the tape off. Depending on how root established they are, if they're very root established, you might need to like tip the whole thing out and then like pull chunks of them apart, depending on how many you had in there. And you have to expect that some of them are just going to die. They're not going to survive the transplant process. So I'd always say if you want a plant to establish somewhere, you could put like a chunk of them in that area. You could also piece them apart, but not all of them are going to survive. If they did, it's because you put them in the right place at the right time, and it was the right plant, and you also still babied it. But yeah, I'm happy to give some more advice and like show you guys what that process looks like if you want to come out to my place in the spring. It's just probably a lot easier to show you what I do than tell you, because honestly, it was a lot of winging and it worked out. Not all of them survived, so maybe some people would say it didn't work out. Depends on how you measure success. It worked out well for me because I made 2 new gardens in my yard last year, all from winter sowing. So I feel like it was very successful.
That's a perfect segue for wrapping up the presentation, and then we can get back into any more finishing questions. Awesome. So if you are not completely winter sowing, we have grant programs that you can access. The grant program that relates to what we're talking about would be the soil health. You would do sowing and you get inspired and you're looking to expand the area. The soil health grant is designated for these native plantings or shoreline restoration. Even a bee lawn or a low-mow turf would fit under that. If you're going into larger projects like what you see in this photo, that would be landscape level 1, maybe even level 2, where you're going big, so the costs are bigger. We might be working with infrastructure adjustments like this curb cut that's taking water from the street and putting it into an area where wet plants are waiting for it. But we also have a rain barrel grant too, so don't forget about using that for 50% reimbursement on a rain barrel sale. Okay. There's some resources that we have on our website for mapping out your yard, kind of like the earlier slides I was talking about. If you want to just throw plants out and see what happens, you can do that, but not everybody wants to wing it so much. So this is a nice tool to visualize your yard. You can pull up your property and draw out shapes and different colors and try to make a bit of a landscaping plan. And it can actually really help you communicate with a nursery or a contractor or a landscaper. If you're showing them something tangible, they're going to really like being able to see your vision, and they'll be able to predict, like, oh, here's your shady area, here's your sunny area, and you might have a smoother process overall. So that is at vlamo.org. At the bottom of the page, you'll see the link called GIS Web Map. You'll also be able to see all of the layers we have. This is an example of floodplain layers. This is different colors for 5, 10, and 100-year storm events. So we have all that data. You can really nerd out and dig into that if you want, or just sort of pass it. I have a web map tutorial on our YouTube channel to explain how to use and interact with that resource. And this is only the start. This is kicking off a packed spring season of workshops. Next up, we have a cost share open house where you'll see even more examples of projects that you can glean ideas from. We have a special guest talking about smart plant planning to sort of graduate from the shopping spontaneity of whatever falls in your cart. And then we have our rain gardens focus on April 20th. Okay, and this I want to point out that was a special send. Somebody in the watershed actually cross-stitched this and sent it to us. And it's just so inspiring and so great that somebody would take the time to illustrate the native plant root structure and dedicate time to let us enjoy it.
I had my hand up. I was just curious about shady natives. And I know you sent out that link earlier. And so I was reading about some of those, but I see so many examples that you give that are beautiful and they're full sun. And I guess I'm just curious about some of that, and maybe you'll touch on that later, but.
Well, I'll touch on it a little bit now because
Okay.
I expected that would be a question.
Oh, perfect.
And I'll be completely honest. Winter sowing of plants that like sun tends to just be easier, just because maybe I'm just biased, but a lot of the shade loving plants, some of them are very early spring bloomers, and they don't tend to be very easy to winter sow.
Okay.
That's
I
not true
tried
for
winter
all of
sowing
them.
last year and failed miserably, which is why I'm here. 'Cause
Yeah.
it was like a
So,
bad thing.
some plants
So-
are really easy and some are just terribly difficult. And
Okay.
most of the plantings that I've focused on so far have been full sun, just because it's been very easy for me to proliferate them and even buy plants from native nurseries. I would say if you're looking for shade plants, there are some that are easy to grow. And then some you might just be better off buying from a native nursery where like they actually have a dedicated staff that like knows what they're doing, and they have their own kind of secret ways that they can get some of those difficult things to propagate.
Okay.
And then maybe over time you can split them, or just like natural dispersal of the seeds could help that area.